Imagine this. You are walking through the streets of ancient Rome and witness a scene that freezes your blood. Emperor Nero himself is strolling through the forum with a stunning young woman draped in silk and jewels who appears to be his new wife. Yet everyone whispers behind them, because they know the terrible truth. The woman standing beside the emperor was once a boy named Sporus. What Nero did to him is one of the most horrific examples of psychological and physical violence recorded in history. Before starting these stories of survival and suffering, if you like discovering the hidden truths of history, consider pressing the like button and subscribing for more content like this. Also, leave a comment saying where you're listening from. The story you are about to hear is not just one of Roman extravagance. It is the story of how absolute power turns love into obsession, grief into madness, and a human being into a living puppet serving one man's dark fantasy. The name Sporus may not be familiar to you now, but once you hear his story, it will stay with you for a long time. It was during this period that Sporus caught Nero's attention, still unaware of the horror ahead. Sporus was probably 14 or 15 years old, born a slave in the imperial household and freed as a child. He grew up in the palace and was educated for administrative duties, a relatively privileged but completely dependent position. Freedmen owed everything to their former masters and were thus utterly vulnerable. One day they could rise to great influence, the next be punished or killed without cause. It was not Sporus's mind but his face that drew Nero's eye. Ancient sources note the boy's astonishing resemblance to Poppaea, especially his eyes and delicate facial features. At that time, Romans considered physical likeness a sign of a deep spiritual bond, and this similarity seemed almost supernatural. When Nero first saw Sporus after Poppaea's death, something clicked in his broken mind, a chance to restore what he had destroyed. He may even for a moment have believed he was seeing Poppaea's spirit in a new body. Of course, there was one obvious problem. Sporus was male. But for a man who considered himself a god and had spent months talking to a corpse, changing someone's sex was a small obstacle. What followed was one of the most calculated acts of cruelty in human history. Nero was not content with dressing Sporus as a woman. He wanted to make the transformation permanent. He summoned Rome's best physicians and ordered them to perform surgery to make the youth appear more feminine. This was not merely bodily harm. It was the systematic destruction of Sporus's identity. The procedure was dangerous, painful, and irreversible, often ending in death from infection or blood loss. But even if Sporus survived, he would be permanently changed physically, emotionally, and socially. He would never be able to father children, form normal relationships, or ever again be fully accepted as a man in Roman society. The operation was performed in the imperial palace, in rooms specially prepared for this purpose. Surgical practices of the ancient world were primitive, relying on simple instruments and crude anesthetics. The procedure was unbearably painful, lasted for hours, and carried a very high risk of death. As the doctors approached with their instruments, Sporus was held in place by guards, because his screams mattered to no one. The recovery process took weeks, perhaps months. When everything was finished, Nero made an announcement that shocked even the Roman aristocracy. He would take this youth as his spouse in a full imperial wedding ceremony. Preparations lasted for months and cost a fortune. Sporus took the name Sabina in honor of the dead empress and was moved to special quarters to prepare for his new role. The palace tailors created an entire wardrobe tailored to his altered body shape, designed to conceal what remained of his male features. Master jewelers crafted ornaments specifically for him, many incorporating precious stones that had belonged to Poppaea. These were not just decorations, but physical relics of the dead woman, symbolic traces of the person Sporus was forced to replace. Cosmetics experts taught him techniques to give a female appearance, applying kohl to enlarge his eyes, rouge to his cheeks, and powder to soften the harsh lines of his face. These lessons were not just about appearance. They were part of the systematic erasure of his original identity. Hairdressers trained him in the elaborate hairstyles fashionable among aristocratic Roman women. His hair was cut, curled, and arranged into complex forms decorated with expensive ornaments. This process took hours every day, requiring several attendants and heated metal tools. Perhaps the most psychologically destructive lessons were in female behavior and etiquette. Sporus was assigned teachers who showed him how to walk, sit, and gesture like a woman. After the wedding, Nero treated Sporus exactly as he would a legitimate empress. The young man received his own household staff, quarters within the palace complex, and income from the imperial treasury. He had a litter for travel, horses for riding, and a retinue of attendants. But all this apparent luxury came at a terrible price: the complete erasure of his original identity and the constant performance of a psychologically devastating role. Sporus was expected to accompany Nero to public functions, sit beside him at state dinners, and play the devoted wife in all interactions. This was not merely about appearances. Nero genuinely seemed to believe he had resurrected Poppaea. He would call Sporus by his dead wife's name, reminisce about shared memories that had never happened, and expect responses that upheld the elaborate fiction. For Sporus, each day became a high-stakes performance where the slightest mistake could mean death. He had to remember not only how to look and act like a woman, but also how to respond as if he were Poppaea herself. When Nero mentioned events from his previous marriage, Sporus had to react as though he remembered them personally. Ancient sources describe Sporus as becoming increasingly skilled at this deception, developing an almost uncanny ability to anticipate Nero's moods and respond appropriately. Yet they also note that he grew more withdrawn and melancholic over time, even as he continued to play his assigned role flawlessly in public. The psychological strain is almost unimaginable. Each morning, Sporus awoke in rooms decorated to evoke a dead woman he had never met. Every reflection in the mirror showed a face that no longer resembled his own. Every conversation required pretending to be someone else, claiming memories and experiences that were not his. For over 2 years, Sporus endured this bizarre existence. His ordeal deepened when Nero decided to tour Greece. The emperor fancied himself an artist and longed to compete in Greek festivals where he believed his talents would be properly appreciated. Naturally, Sporus accompanied him, presented to foreign dignitaries as the Empress of Rome. Imagine Greek aristocrats trying to make sense of their conqueror traveling with a teenage boy dressed as a woman, insisting everyone treat this obvious fiction as reality. By 68 AD, however, Nero's excesses had finally pushed the Roman establishment too far. Rebellions broke out across the empire, led by governors weary of the emperor's erratic behavior and neglect of governance. The Praetorian Guard declared its opposition to Nero's rule, and the Senate condemned him as an enemy of the state. When Nero fled Rome with a small group of supporters, Sporus was among them. Even in the face of death, the emperor could not leave behind his living reminder of Poppaea. They hid in a villa outside Rome, waiting for either rescue or capture, while Nero vacillated between grandiose escape plans and theatrical preparations for suicide. When word arrived that his enemies were closing in, Nero chose death over capture. But his suicide left Sporus terribly exposed as one of the most visible symbols of Nero's reign. He became both a valuable prize and a dangerous liability for whoever seized power next. What followed was perhaps even more tragic. Sporus became a political pawn, passed from one powerful man to another like a piece of valuable property.